Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, this is Nerds to Human and welcome to the special Games Guide edition of Medieval 2 Total War. Today we will be looking at these three options: Occupy, Sack or Exterminate. And each of these three options will come up many times in your game, every time of course you capture a settlement. What we want to do today is look at exactly what each of these options entails. Naturally, we know that you gain some amount of florins or you get some of the population massacred, and that varies depending on which of the three options you choose. But it isn't quite as simple as that. They do obviously have a significant effect on diplomacy, and particularly this one here has a bit of a hidden secret that I don't think too many people talk about. The simplest of the three options is the top one here, Occupy, and in essence it simply means the population are left as they are and you gain a small amount of money, in this case about 5,000 florins, simply because Rome is so big. Extermination will remove 3/4 of the population, while sacking will only remove a quarter. But sacking will get you a huge amount of money, 54,000 in this case, while Exterminate will get about half of what you get from sacking it, so 27,000 florins on this occasion. Now which of the three you want to choose depends on your circumstance, and I will get into those. But I think what I want to do first is point out one of the major differences with Exterminate here that often isn't actually noticed by people. To notice the difference though, we want to first occupy the settlement and we'll see what the city looks like in its normal form. Having occupied the city, we can see a big population here, 45,108. We left them all in the city, but that of course has left us with a few problems, which is the public order here is down at 0, and yeah, even with a low tax rate, it's only going to go up to 25%. We do have a fair amount of garrison here, so you wouldn't think it'd be too much of a problem in that sense. Between religious unrest, general unrest, distance to capital and squalor, we've got quite a few problems which aren't going to be fixed. In many ways, obviously, occupying the settlement here was not the most sensible idea. That brings us back to our previous screen here. Now, obviously, occupy isn't going to be the most sensible option. What about sacking the city? Well, we'll kill about a quarter of the people. Probably not going to be nearly enough. Really, sacking the settlement is the best option when you're looking for a bit of money, or if the town is largely going to be able to look after itself in terms of public order, and you just want to slightly cut down the populace to keep it easy, as maybe you move your troops on to the next conquest. Now, Exterminate is probably the most likely option for us here, where the population to be massacred is about 3/4, and we get a little bit of money anyway. 27,000 is nothing to be sniffed at. Certainly, with the money we've got here, we don't need to be rushing to sack it in a desperate attempt to gain money. Now, extermination is probably the right option. Having exterminated the city this time, our public order is up to 140%, far more sustainable and manageable, of course. Now, we could, at this point, turn up to very, very high tax rate, which will get us in more money, or we could do the opposite, take it down to low, grab our army with a minimal garrison, and send them off to their next campaign. Marvellous. Still a public order of 105. It's worth bearing in mind though that in the medium term your income will be knocked by the fact that you've just killed 3/4 of your tax paying population. Yeah, you just need to balance that out between the money that you've then lost in the medium term and the, well, in this case 27,000 florins we gained when we exterminated. It's probably going to be worth it if, like here, your public order was such a big problem. There is something that is worth bearing in mind. Although the population growth is booming right now, for some reason the bloody massacres act as some sort of aphrodisiac here. It might look like exterminating solves all your problems. It's the perfect balance between money and exterminated enemies. Perfect, you might think. Well, eagle-eyed viewers might notice that as I'm pointing down the bottom here, some of these buildings are different to what they were before. And that's because when you exterminate the city, you also burn down a lot of the buildings. Technically, it is still a huge city with a huge stone wall upgrade. But if I take you over to the barracks here, what we'll start to notice is that all the infrastructure is only that of a minor city. It's been knocked back several stages. So before we did have a militia barracks, but now it's only that of a minor city. It's as if the city is back to just having grown into a large city. So if I take you to ports once again, the large city port, the dockyard isn't there, it's only the shipwright of the minor city. Same with the sea trade. No docklands, no warehouse, only the minor city's merchant wharf. We've caused significant damage to all of our infrastructure here. So the Wayfarer's Rest is gone, we're back to the Shisha House, the Town Hall is all the way back to the Council Chambers. In fact, even the guilds get affected by this too. We can't have the large city's Master Thief Guild, it's now just a basic Thieves Guild. you've created a massive, massive problem with your infrastructure that's going to take a huge amount of money and many, many turns to repair. Having noticed the scale of this destruction, you're probably thinking you never want to actually exterminate a city again. Indeed, I'd be fairly perturbed to do so myself. Let's take the militia drill square, for example. This was originally up to militia barracks, so to get this back to where it previously was, we will have to spend a significant amount of time and money to do so. 5 turns, 4,800 to be exact for the 4th level barracks. So if I just very quickly skip that through with the little cheat, we'll get that done, and then the level 5 militia barracks will be another 6 turns and 9,600 florins. So let's just get that one processed too. And now we've just spent 11 turns and 14,400 florins to rebuild those 2 buildings which were already there before we exterminated it. But it wasn't just that. There were tons and tons of buildings that we did. There's the dockyards over there. There are the warehouses here. The docklands there. There are streams of these buildings. It included the merchants' quarters, the mayor's palace. It included the guild as well, which is only going to come up when they offer it to you. The amount of time and money is ridiculous. In fact, I've actually calculated it. Overall, it's 49 turns, 48,800 florins worth of rebuilding you would need to do, which, when you think about it, is absolutely ridiculous. 49 turns is actually just about 20% of the game time. So if you consider how long it would take to repair from that extermination, is that going to be worth it? I would suggest probably not. Where does that leave us then with the city? Because Exterminate clearly seems like it's incredibly destructive, and Occupy naturally had its own problems. Well, Sack obviously is the balance in between. Normally I would only use this in order to grab all of the money when I desperately need it. Clearly my coffers are pretty full right now, but in terms of population, I could do with a few of them being knocked back, so maybe this will just work. It's worth stressing right now that sacking doesn't do anything to the building infrastructure. We've still got the militia barracks as we had with Occupy, we've still got the docklands, we've still got the dockyard. Indeed, our infrastructure has not changed. We've kept that safe and we've not damaged any of those. We have killed some of the population though, and in this case that's good because we want to get the public order up. And 55% is a little bit low, but if we turn it down to low tax rate, we can get it to a just about manageable state. Now it's worth bearing in mind, if you're trying to launch yourself onto the next little invasion, then you will have to spend a bit of time, or will have to have reinforcement armies to garrison. That is the unfortunate balance you're going to have to make. But it is now doable. We can keep this under control, and we don't have to destroy all of our infrastructure. So while sacking seemed like the least logical thing to do with all my money, actually it's going to be by far the best option in terms of keeping the public order sensible, but also not destroying the entire infrastructure of the city. Which is the best option to be choosing then? Well, obviously with a tiny village like this, Tingvala in the Teutonic campaign, I would suggest Occupy is your only option. If you want to exterminate 302 people, you're just crippling yourself to go forward. Not because of destroying infrastructure this time, but of course you'll be cutting the population down to its minimum cap of 400, and it will take a huge amount of time to grow. Sacking is going to gain you almost nothing. Occupying, whilst it may not gain you any florins, it is going to be the best option to keep it growing. With populations of over 6,000, minor cities might start to give you temptation of sacking or exterminating the populace. But the key thing you want to look at is the loyalty. We saw with Rome that the only reason we had to consider exterminating, or indeed sacking it as we chose in the end, was because of its public order. And we can see this is green, this is happy here. And as long as that is not terrible, we should never really be thinking about exterminating. Indeed, we should always be wanting to choose Occupy, and we need to have a compelling argument to not choose to occupy the settlement. Now, sacking obviously will gain us a good amount of money, but in this case 4,500, alright, it's a little bit of money, but it's not going to be a life-changing amount. You've really got to weigh up, is that going to make a really significant difference? Maybe you have a settlement under siege, maybe you need to relieve it with some rushed mercenaries last minute. Well, perhaps then those florins are going to make the difference. That's really your call. 1,300 population will set you back a little bit, but it's not the end of the world. You will be able to recover from that. You won't have smashed up the city infrastructure. No, I think this is certainly a situation for Occupy. The settlement is nice and happy. I'm not desperate for money, and indeed that should be your thinking. Is there any reason that I shouldn't occupy it? Is my public order going down the pot, or indeed do I desperately need the money? Now, much like Rome Crusading armies, like at the start of the game here, are probably the natural time when picking occupy is clearly lunacy. If we occupy, yeah, currently there's a potential for revolt. We're going to have to massacre some of the population here. Now, obviously, sacking will get rid of a quarter, extermination will get rid of 3/4 of the people here. Now, this is probably where you choose to exterminate, and has typically been where I've chosen to exterminate. But do we even need to do it? Well, sacking, I suspect, will give us just about enough to control the public order. And actually, 18,500 foreigners at the start of the game is quite tempting, and I think it's probably a good time to do it. So we sack the settlement here. We now have 70 public order. Low tax rate will get it up to 100. Very manageable. And from here we can of course build ourselves a church, get our priests, start building other bits of infrastructure, and in a few turns, probably 4 or 5 turns, we'll have the public order well under control. Actually, moreover with this, we haven't destroyed the infrastructure. These have been damaged from when we just auto-resolved the battle. But the racing track will actually give us the races to further control the public order if that's what we want to do. So I would even suggest the one-time Crusades that I probably would have told you to exterminate. Actually, I would still suggest sacking is the option you want to go with. The only real disadvantage to extermination here is that, of course, you probably are going to need your garrison for a few turns while you get yourself set up with all your priests and your churches, etc. So if you want to go and attack Alexandria or take up these other armies in the field, you'll probably have to wait a few turns. If you exterminate, you probably could just march straight on. But honestly, I think for the infrastructure damage you would have caused, I don't think that will be worth it at all. So once again, sacking is really a far better option than extermination under pretty much all circumstances. We also need to consider the impact on diplomacy, because of course if you occupy all the settlements or you sack them all, you're going to have a different reputation. And of course that also impacts your relationship with the faction involved in that particular city. So you probably notice on here that it has different relationships. I have amiable here with Spain, very poor with France, perfect with the Papal States, abysmal with the Moors. Now all of these are actually on a numerical scale in the background, of course. The Papal States will be at 1.0, perfect relationship. Whereas my relationship with the Moors will be more like -1, because that is abysmal. And there's obviously everything in between, with completely neutral being 0. But obviously there's also your reputation. Now, your reputation works on the same scale, between -1 and 1. Dubious clearly refers to it being slightly below 0 right now. I'm slightly into the negative. Holy Roman Empire here are untrustworthy. They're probably slightly further down on that scale. How does this actually look in the files then? Well, of course, these different options all have different impacts. Now, I discussed in my previous video about debugging Medieval 2 Total War that you will need to add these 3 semicolons in here to fix it, because what happens in the base game is that when you occupy, it actually does a negative effect on your global standing. So we want to make sure we fix that first, so that occupying, as you might expect, shows you to be chivalrous. It will improve your global reputation. So that's what this refers to here. And as you might expect, exterminate is the opposite. Exterminate will lower your faction global standing. And minus 0.05 is not insignificant. That's quite a good chunk, especially if you consider how many cities you might take during the course of a few years on the game. Second settlement, as you might imagine, is minus, but it's nowhere near as bad as extermination. It's minus 0.2. When you occupy a city then, you'll see that your global reputation increases by 0.05, but it also has an impact on the faction that you have just attacked. Now, in the example of Timurids taking Rome and decided to occupy the city, the Timurids have attacked the Papal States. Now, what this says here is that the Papal States' relationship with me will now actually normalise towards 1.0. Actually means it's going to have a small increase. Now, it says normalise 1.0 with 20 over there. That's actually a divisor. Let me just explain what that means, because it does involve a little bit of maths. How exactly does this work then? Well, basically it works through the normalization progress. At least that's what the game calls it. Basically it takes 2 parameters. It takes the target value of going up towards 1.0, and it has a divisor, which is this one here, which is currently in this case 20. Now basically it takes your current reputation, or your current standing with another faction, and moves it by 1 divided the divisor towards the target. Now in practice what that means is this. Let's say our relationship is fairly positive, it's 0.6, and if we occupy the city here, we're going to get it normalised by 1.0 over a divisor of 20. So if we do the maths here, it's going to be 1 and then take away 0.6, so that equals 0.4. We then need to use our divisor of 20 to get 0.02. So we can make a little note of that. So now basically what we need to do is add that on to our original number there. So add 0.02. And this is going to be our new level of relationship. We've now got 0.62 as our relationship with this faction. So it does a tiny increase onto our general relationship. What if we have a bad relationship with the faction then? Let's say, for example, that we have a relationship of minus 0.8. So if we go through the maths this time, we'll have 1 plus 0.8, and then we need to take the divisor of 20, and then 0.09. So we're going to have to add that on to our original stand-in. So original relationship was minus 0.8. We need to add on the 0.09. Now this is going to be our new relationship, minus 0.71. Now you notice that's actually gone up by a significant amount, much more than when we already had a good relationship. And that's essentially because if your reputation or standing is bad, the good deeds will improve it a lot, and indeed the bad deeds will damage it only a little. And if your reputation or standing is good, your good deeds will improve it only a little, but bad deeds will damage it a lot. So you can see a little bit of an extreme scale. It pulls you back towards the middle. You might notice the line below talks about the target allies, and that's because it isn't just the target faction, in this case the Papal States, who is influenced by this particular siege. It's also their allies. Let's say the Papal States are allied with the Spanish. That means that the Papal States will have a change in our relationship with them, but so will the Spanish. So we need to bear that in mind. The same goes for when you exterminate the population too. If we decide to exterminate Rome, we would have ourselves a particularly negative impact. So -1, and this time by a divisor of 10. So it's going to be even more significant. And indeed, there's also going to be an impact on their allies. I've already mentioned that if you have a good relationship, your bad deeds will affect your relationship standing quite a lot. Let's put that to the test, because exterminate population here not only has a small divisor of -1, but we can go and test it now as well with a positive relationship. So let's say we have 0.6. 0.6 is our relationship again. So let's start in -1, and this time we need to take away our 0.6 and then use our divisor of 10. So minus 0.16. So let's go to our original particular reputation with them. So our relationship was 0.6, and this time we are going to add on the minus 0.16. So our new relationship now is 0.44. That's a big drop in our relationship. And that's because it was already quite strong, but we committed a really grievous and negative act. It's worth bearing in mind that particularly if you stab an ally in the back, you are very quickly going to lose that relationship, because that extermination is so much more impactful when you previously were seen as trustworthy and friendly. So is all that maths really going to change the way I think about, and indeed the way I play this game going forward? I think it probably will, to be fair, because once you've done the fix of diplomacy, you really see the benefits that occupying the cities will cause. Now obviously, when you play this, by the time you're about the size of this empire here, it probably doesn't really matter what you do in terms of diplomacy. If you exterminate the city, everyone already hates you. It's not going to make much difference. I'm very untrustworthy. Abysmal. Oh no, only terrible, so that's alright. And abysmal relationships. So by this point, it probably isn't even worth considering. I'm much better at thinking about the infrastructure. But of course, when you start the game, it can have a huge impact. You can really set your reputation as being trustworthy, or being someone who your allies can actually trust to be at their side. Now, if you do the little fix of diplomacy and you start occupying cities from the start of the game, you will find that you have positive relations all around. And those endless wars where your relationships are just terrible and you can't repair them, you might find you can start to get the odd ceasefire. And whilst obviously this is total war and you want to go and destroy everything, there is an element to me where I want to occasionally to be able to slow down, play a slightly slower paced game. And once you've got that diplomacy fixed and you start making use of occupying the settlements, you'll really get a big boost from it. Not to mention the fact that you won't have destroyed all your city's infrastructure. That's all for now then, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed this little dabble into the game mechanics of Medieval 2 Total War. Indeed, the Occupy, Sack and Exterminate mechanic does have a little bit more to it than you might have at first thought. And indeed, maybe you'll do things a little bit differently going forward. Do make sure, if you haven't checked out my video on fixing the diplomacy problems, do make sure you go and watch that. It will certainly help you out. And indeed, occupying the city isn't going to help you if you don't go and fix that problem. It will just treat it like you've exterminated them and everyone will hate you. So yeah, do go and sort that out as well. But for now, I will leave you. I'm Thomas, this is To Notice the Hearing, and this has been our latest game guide of Medieval 2 Total War. Thank you, and good night. Twice baked Italian is on the menu today. Infantry, come kill the Mongol scum. Ha 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 ha! This is just perfect! Look at it! Look at their infantry line! It's been annihilated by their own elephants! Death comes to flying Mongols!